Hi Year 6 and welcome to Wednesday's science lesson. We're going to follow on today from our learning on evolution and Charles Darwin. I'm going to look at an example of natural selection. To start the lesson, you need to have watched me reading the book Moth. It'll be too long if I put it into this lesson and it would make 2 videos anyway. So if you haven't already watched it, please go and find that and then come back, otherwise you won't understand what we're talking about. Okay, so if you've listened to the story, then we can continue. Can you remember what natural selection actually means? Hearing the story might have helped. You might remember from our learning on Charles Darwin in the last lesson. Natural selection is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, how animals have changed over time. He thinks that natural selection explains how animals have changed. The animals in a species who have the most successful characteristics for survival will pass those characteristics on to their children, their offspring, and then they will create more animals in the species with that characteristic. Therefore, the species will be able to thrive and survive. Eventually, the characteristics that don't help an animal to survive will die out. Let's think about the story that we've just heard then. Pause the video so that you can answer these questions. Which moths survived best at first and why? What happened in the story to change the environment? And remember, it is a true story. And then which moths survived better after the change and why? Pause me and come back. Okay, so hopefully you can remember that we're looking at peppered moths and there was 2 types. There was the speckled ones that were lighter and a mixture of colours, and then there was black moths. At the beginning, the speckled moths survived best. They were light coloured, they blended in nicely to the trees, the texture of the environment, and they were camouflaged from predators, so they couldn't be seen by predators and they were more likely to survive. What happened to change the environment was the Industrial Revolution. So lots more factories and buildings, lots more pollution was happening. Soot started to cover the environment and the environment turned much darker. And suddenly then, after that, it was the black moths that survived best because they could blend into the soot on the buildings, on the trees. And so after that, there started to be more black moths. So, your little challenge to start us off. There is a moth template on the website, so you can download that, print that if you're able. If you are not able, then you can just draw your moths. It will be quite simple. What I want you to do is design the patterns of your 12 moths. So we are going to put them into different habitats on the screen to see which would have survived and which wouldn't have, depending on their markings, to mirror what happened with the speckled moths and the black moths. So pause me here, spend a little bit of time designing them. They can all be different, they can all be the same, they can have whatever patterns you want. Then come back and I'll show you the different environments so you can see whether your moth would survive or not. Super, hope you've got 12 little moths now. It'll probably be easiest if you cut them out so they're all separate. I'm going to show you 4 different habitats, 4 different environments that your moth could hypothetically live in. And you're going to put your moth up to the screen and you're going to decide which of your moths would survive because they can't be seen very clearly and they wouldn't be able to get eaten by predators. And then which of your moths would die because they would end up getting eaten by predators. So which patterned moth would be the most successful and which one would end up reproducing more of the same to go on and change your species of moth. So let's have a look at our environments. Okay, so ocean environment then. Pop your moths on there. Do you have any? Have you invented any moths that would survive well in this ocean environment? Obviously, it's not a natural environment for moths, but if you decided to do a plain bright blue moth, it would probably be surviving fairly well if we ignore the fact that it would have to breathe underwater. So just a little bit of fun, a little bit of a game to help you to understand why camouflage is so important for animals to survive. Let's have a look at the next environment. So this is a rainforest type of environment. Put your moths up to the screen. Will they survive here? So these kind of trees are the kind of places where I guess speckled moths would have survived quite well in this kind of browny speckled bark. Maybe if you've done green or brown patterns for your moths, they would survive quite well here. Let's look at the next one. a desert environment. Again, thinking only about the camouflage and not the heat. Would any of your moths survive in this desert environment? You could put them up to the screen. If you've decided to do them in a sandy colour, then they're probably going to blend in quite well. But if you've done a really brightly coloured or a black moth maybe, they're going to stand out and they wouldn't be able to survive here. And then lastly, this coloured houses environment. So if you have designed a bright pink moth, it's going to blend in really well in this town with brightly coloured houses. So that's a bit of a silly little game just to show you really, but what it shows is that actually camouflage is really important for survival, and animals do adapt to their different environments. So if a whole species of moth ended up living in this town, the ones that were brightly coloured would survive better, and then Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection suggests that those moths would be the ones that survive because they would pass their characteristics on to their offspring wouldn't get eaten by predators, and so on and so on, whereas the other coloured moths would end up getting eaten, and so they would never be able to pass their patterns and their characteristics on to their offspring. Okay, hopefully that helped you and maybe gave you a little bit of a laugh. So your task now, your independent task to go off and do, is as follows. There's a little example here. So what I want you to do is create a sort of storyboard, a cartoon strip if you like, of the story of the peppered moths. So we've done cartoon strips in class before. I put a template up in case you need that, but you can easily draw this yourself. There's an example here. So you've got pictures and you've got captions, and you can have as many or as little boxes as you need. I want you to tell me what happened, each part of that moth story, and how does it link back to natural selection. Okay, so off you go and have a go at that now. I would love to see what you come up with, so I'd love these sent in. Some of your comic strips that you did when we did Margaret Thatcher in history were really, really brilliant, really creative and giving loads and loads of knowledge. So see if you can match that here, telling me this story, an example of natural selection. Thank you for following the lesson. I look forward to seeing your work. Bye-bye.